They pulled me out of the hospital, emptied my bank account, and left me to die alone. So I let the truth destroy their vacation. The nurse put her body in front of the elevator doors. Not metaphorically, not as a gesture. She physically stepped in front of the gap and spread her arms slightly, the way you'd stop a child from running into traffic, and she looked at my mother and said, with the particular calm of someone who has had to say an unbearable thing more than once, "Her oxygen levels are unstable. She needs another night." I watched my mother's face do absolutely nothing. No flicker of concern, no hesitation. She just looked at the nurse the way you look at a vending machine that owes you change, mildly irritated, already moving on, and said, "She's coming home." And that was it. I was still wearing the hospital bracelet. I could feel the adhesive edge of the medical tape on my forearm where the IV had been. I smelled like disinfectant and saline and the specific, humiliating smell of institutional illness. And I was standing in a hospital hallway holding the wall because my legs were not reliable. And my mother had just overruled a medical professional with 4 words and 0 eye contact. The nurse looked at me, not with pity, something more specific than that. A look that said, "I will remember your face. I will write this down." I didn't know then how important that look would become. I just nodded. Because that's what you do when you've spent 26 years being managed like a PR problem. I got in the elevator. Let me back up, because if I start at that moment, you won't understand the geography of it, how it's possible to be that sick in that building, surrounded by people who are supposed to love you and still feel completely alone. I'd been working at a mid-sized architecture firm in Columbus for 3 years, project coordinator. Decent salary, my own apartment on Calumet Street, a rescue cat named Biscuit, and a 5-year plan that was actually progressing. I was, by most metrics, a functional adult. My family didn't see it that way. My mother, Diane, is the kind of woman who treats competence as a personal threat. She's 61, immaculately presented, and has never once in my memory admitted to being wrong about anything. Not about small things. Parking spots, recipe measurements, other people's marriages, and certainly not about me. I was her project, her unfinished renovation. In her mind, I had left home prematurely, chosen the wrong city, worked the wrong job, and worst of all, done all of it without asking her permission. My father, Richard, is what I used to call the diplomat, meaning he never says the cruel thing directly. He just creates the conditions for cruelty and then steps back and looks baffled when it happens. He's 64, tall, the kind of handsome that photographed well when he was young, and he communicates primarily through strategic silence and the occasional text that sounds reasonable and is, functionally, an accusation. My brother Tyler is 29, lives 40 minutes from my parents, and has spent most of his adult life auditioning for the role of favorite child. He's not malicious in the way my mother is. He's just fundamentally incurious about other people's suffering, the way some people are incurious about abstract art. It simply doesn't register. For years, I managed the distance. Holidays, obligatory dinners, phone calls I scheduled like dentist appointments, necessary, unpleasant, brief. The family vacation they planned every summer was always pitched as optional and always, somehow, mandatory. This year, it was a beach resort in Destin, Florida. 6 nights, booked since February. I was not on the booking. I was never asked. I found out in March, the way I found out most things about my family's plans. Through a group chat notification I almost muted. My mother had sent the resort's Instagram page. "Can't wait!" Tyler had responded with a string of emojis. My father had sent a thumbs up. No one had asked if I was coming. No one asked if I wanted to. I told myself that was fine. I had plans. I had work. I had Biscuit and my apartment, and a life that did not require their acknowledgement to exist. That's what I told myself. I'd had respiratory issues since I was 19. Adult onset asthma complicated by a bronchial scarring incident from a bad pneumonia that I'd pushed through instead of treating properly, because I was 19 and invincible, and also because my mother told me it was probably just stress. My pulmonologist, Dr. Renata Ose at Columbus Respiratory Associates, had managed it for 4 years. Good days, bad days, inhalers, monitoring, the occasional round of steroids. I knew my lungs the way you know a difficult coworker, their rhythms, their limits, their particular flavor of unreasonable. On a Tuesday in late June at 2:14 in the afternoon, I stood up from my desk to refill my coffee and the room tilted. Not dizziness. Something deeper than that. A wrongness, like gravity had shifted 3 degrees. I sat back down, tried to breathe, couldn't get the breath all the way in. The kind of not breathing that isn't dramatic, that looks from the outside like someone sitting quietly at their desk, but feels from the inside like trying to inhale through a coffee stirrer. My coworker Priya found me slumped against the wall of the break room 7 minutes later. She called 911 before she even called my name. The paramedic's name was Derek, and he was calm and fast, and he put the oxygen mask on me in the elevator and said, "You're going to be okay. Just breathe with me." And I have never in my life felt so taken care of by a stranger. The ER attending was Dr. Marcus Webb, 10 years in emergency medicine, the kind of doctor who delivers serious news without softening it to mush. He actually sat down, pulled a chair, and told me my oxygen saturation had been at 81% when the paramedics arrived. He told me my lungs had thrown what he called a significant event, and that I needed to be admitted, monitored, and medicated through at least 48 hours of observation before anyone could responsibly discuss discharge. "You are not safe to leave yet," he said, looking directly at me. "I want you to understand that." I understood it. My family arrived 4 hours hours later, my mother walked into the room like she was visiting someone who'd made a questionable life choice. She looked at the monitors, at the IV line, at the oxygen sensor clipped to my finger, and her first words were, "You look terrible." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I was so scared." Just, "You look terrible." As though I had shown up to a function underdressed. My father stood near the window. He was wearing his travel blazer, the navy one he puts on for airports. He'd been scrolling his phone since he walked in, and he looked up briefly, nodded at me like we'd passed in a hallway, and went back to scrolling. Tyler had texted from the parking lot. "Florida gonna slap FR." He never came up. Dr. Webb spoke to them, all three of them. My father finally pocketed the phone. My mother stood with her arms crossed. Dr. Webb explained what had happened, what the numbers meant, what the plan was. He used plain language. He was explicit. He said the phrase, "Another night at minimum, and we're watching for secondary infection, and she should not be exerting herself." My mother waited until he finished. Then she asked, "So she can be discharged tomorrow?" Dr. Webb said, "That is not what I said." My mother smiled. The smile she uses when she has already decided the outcome of a conversation. "We'll touch base tomorrow," she said, like she was wrapping up a conference call. He looked at me one more time before he left. I know what that look meant now. He was trying to give me an out, an opening, a moment to say, "No, wait, I want to hear more. I have questions." But I was 26 years old, and my mother was in the room, and I had been trained since childhood to defer to her momentum, and I didn't take it. The next morning, before the second round of monitoring was complete, my mother was at the nursing station saying it was time to go. The nurse, her badge said Patricia Morales, RN, and she had probably been a nurse for longer than I'd been alive. She walked to the elevator and put herself in front of it. "Her oxygen levels are unstable. She needs another night. She's coming home." I got in the elevator. They drove me to their house in Gahanna, not to my apartment, not to Calumet Street where my cat was, where my things were, where I had control over even the smallest decisions, to their house. The drive was 45 minutes, and I spent the first 20 of them trying to figure out why I felt so disoriented. And then I realized I had expected, on some animal level, to be taken care of. I had expected the calculus to change. I had expected that seeing me on a hospital bed with tubes in my arm would have tripped some wire, activated some instinct. It hadn't. I asked for my debit card around exit 14 on I-270. I'd left my wallet with my mother when they admitted me. Standard, just safer. And I wanted it back. She kept driving. 15 seconds of silence. Then, in the same tone she'd used to mention she'd borrowed a sweater, "We used your account for the rental car and hotel. We'll pay you back." I looked at my phone. The Chase app takes about 30 seconds to load on a slow connection. I watched the numbers appear like a slow-motion car accident. Hertz rental car, Orlando Airport, $312. Mariners Cove Resort, Destin. Deposit, $1,847. Delta Airlines, seat upgrade, 2 passengers, $290. Sunset Grill, prepaid reservation, party of 4, $180. That last one had a timestamp of 6:43 p.m. the previous evening, while I was in the hospital bed, while monitors were beeping, while a nurse was trying to get me one more night of oxygen and observation. My family had been on their phones booking dinner reservations. The total was $2,729, gone. While I sat there fighting for breath, my hands went very still on the phone, not shaking. The opposite. That specific stillness that happens when your nervous system can't decide what to do next and just stops. I said nothing. I looked out the window at the highway. I noted the exit number. They walked me into the house on Ridgebrook Drive like something fragile they didn't want to break, not out of care, but out of liability. My mother put a paper bag on the kitchen table, saltine crackers, CVS brand cold medicine, 2 cans of Campbell's chicken noodle soup. "Just rest," she said. "We'll be back in 4 days." I stared at her, waited. There was no punchline. "I can't be alone," I said. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Not weak, just factual, the way you state a measurement. I collapse when I stand. The doctor said, "You heard what the doctor said," Tyler said from the hallway, where he'd appeared with his suitcase already rolling behind him. "Call 911 if you're that bad." And then he carried his bag to the car. My father touched my shoulder, once, lightly, like a formality, and followed him. My mother said, "There's a charger in the guest room." Then she left. I heard the car start. I heard the tires on the gravel driveway. Then the sound faded, and the silence came down like something dropped from a height. I stood at the kitchen window for approximately 30 seconds before my legs gave their opinion on the matter. I sat down on the tile floor. It was cooler there anyway. The phone was at 9%. I hadn't had a chance to charge it. My charger was at my apartment, and the charger in the guest room was a different cable type. My inhaler was almost empty. I'd been rationing since the previous afternoon. I opened the refrigerator from the floor because it was easier than standing. 3 Modelo bottles, a jar of banana peppers, cream cheese, expiration date 3 weeks prior, a fruit bowl on the counter, 3 oranges so soft they'd concaved. On the wall calendar, the kind with a different national park photograph for each month, July had a block lettered in blue marker, vacation. There were little sun stickers. My mother had put little sun stickers on the vacation days. I called her. Voicemail. I called my father. He picked up. Airport sounds in the background. Announcements. Wheels on linoleum. "Take the cold pills," he said. Then, quieter, as though the surrounding noise gave him permission to be honest, "Don't ruin this trip over panic. Don't ruin the trip over panic." I called Tyler. He laughed when he heard my voice. Just once. Short. Not amused. Just mean. The laugh of someone who finds weakness tiresome. "You need to act like an adult," he said. Then hung up. By noon I was on the kitchen tile again, not by choice. Shallow breaths coming in fractions. The ceiling fan turning slowly above me, wobbling slightly on its mount. I watched it for a while. I thought about how Dr. Webb had said you are not safe to leave yet, and how my mother had smiled, and how the nurse had put her body in front of the elevator. I thought about Biscuit, who had an automatic feeder and 3 days of food, and who did not deserve whatever this was. I thought about the 2,129s. I picked up my phone, 7% now, and opened my texts. My fingers were clumsy. I texted my neighbor on Calumet Street, Mrs. Eleanor Delaney, who was 73, retired from the Franklin County school system, and who had once brought me soup when I had a cold I hadn't told anyone about because she had simply noticed I hadn't checked my mail. The text I sent, "Can you help? Trouble breathing. Alone. House in Gahanna, not mine." I didn't finish the address. I managed to drop a pin. She was at the door in 10 minutes. I had made it to the entrance, not standing on my hands and knees, and I remember the carpet pattern in the hallway, a repeating diamond shape, and I remember thinking that was a strange thing to notice when you couldn't breathe. Mrs. Delaney opened the door that I'd managed to unlock. She saw me. She didn't say anything. Not one word. She called 911 with one hand and pressed the other one, steady and warm, against my shoulder, and held it there. The pressure of her hand on my shoulder. That's the thing I go back to. The same hospital. The same ER bay, I think. Or one close enough that it felt identical. Dr. Marcus Webb appeared like a man who had been proven right and wished he hadn't been. He looked at my chart, then at me, then back at the chart. "Your oxygen was at 78% when they brought you in," he said. His voice was professional, precise, but underneath the precision was something that sounded like fury, being kept very carefully in a box. "You're dehydrated. The inflammation markers are higher than yesterday. We're going to run a full panel, but I want you to understand," he paused. "You were discharged AMA, against medical advice. I need to document that clearly, because what I'm seeing right now is what I told your family would happen if you left." I nodded. He ordered the tests. He was gone for a few minutes. Then he came back with someone else. She introduced herself as Camille Torres, MSW, hospital social worker, 11 years with Ohio Health. She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back and reading glasses on a chain, and she sat in the chair beside my bed with a notepad and asked me careful questions in the way that careful people ask careful questions. Slowly, specifically, leaving room. Did my family often handle my finances without my knowledge or consent? Had they interfered with my medical care before? Were the charges on my account made without my permission? Had I felt safe in their home? I told her everything. The elevator, the nurse, the drive, the debit card charges appearing in real time on my phone, the paper bag of crackers, the sun stickers on the calendar, Tyler hanging up, my father's voice at the airport, "Don't ruin this over panic," like I had manufactured my lungs. Camille Torres took notes. She didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, didn't offer expressions of sympathetic horror. She just wrote. When I finished, she looked up from her notepad and said, "What happened to you was not your fault, and you do not have to go back." I had been holding something in my chest for approximately 31 hours at that point, not crying, nothing so clean as that, something more structural, a weight. It didn't go away when she said that, but it shifted. "Do you want to document this?" she asked. I said yes. Camille Torres moved fast and with precision. She contacted Detective Roy Callahan from Columbus PD's Financial Crimes Unit, 22 years on the force, the kind of detective who has seen every flavor of family fraud and has stopped being surprised by any of it. He came to the hospital room that evening, badge and notepad, and he sat across from me and listened to the whole thing, and then he said, "Unauthorized use of a debit card by a family member is still a crime. Relationship doesn't create permission." He helped me file a formal police report, case number 2024 FCU 04471. Camille helped me call Chase Fraud Services and freeze the card. She sat with me while I was on hold. She handed me the notepad to write down the confirmation numbers. Dr. Webb, meanwhile, was doing his own documentation. He flagged the AMA discharge, wrote a detailed clinical note about the condition in which I'd been readmitted, and, I didn't know this until later, he personally called the hospital's patient advocate to ensure there was a formal record of the family's intervention at the elevator. The nurse, Patricia Morales, RN. She had already written her own incident report. She told the patient advocate that she had informed the family member, identified as my mother, that discharge was medically inadvisable, and that the family member had disregarded this information and proceeded. 3 professionals, 3 separate documented accounts. My mother thought she was walking out of a building. She was walking into a paper trail. I saved everything from my phone that night while I was still hooked to the IV. My mother's voicemail from the day before I was hospitalized, calling to confirm I wasn't planning on making the vacation weird. My father's text from 9:22 p.m. the previous night, sent from what I now knew was a Florida airport, that said, "You've made this into something it didn't need to be." Tyler's text, "Hope the drama was worth it." I saved the Chase transaction history with timestamps. I screenshotted everything. I emailed it all, the screenshots, the audio files, the transaction records, to a folder I labeled "Do Not Delete," and shared it with my Google account, my work email, and Mrs. Delaney's email address, because she was the kind of woman who checked her inbox every morning and would notice if something happened. I also, on Camille's advice, contacted Columbus Legal Aid. Within 48 hours, I had a phone consultation scheduled with an attorney named Naomi Park, who specialized in elder and family financial abuse cases. She had been practicing for 14 years. When I described the situation, she said, with the quietness of someone who has heard too many versions of this story, "The timestamps alone are going to be significant." significant. Exhibit A. Bank records showing $2,629 in unauthorized charges, time-stamped to the hours I was hospitalized and unable to consent. Exhibit B. AMA discharge documentation signed by hospital staff noting family-pressured early release. Exhibit C. Medical readmission records showing deteriorated condition consistent with early discharge. Exhibit D. Voicemails and text messages demonstrating awareness of my medical condition and continued indifference. She emailed me that list. I read it 4 times. Here's the part I want you to understand about fraud investigations. They move quietly. You don't get a dramatic moment. There's no scene. There's no phone call with music behind it. What happens is that a flag appears in a system. A human being reviews it, and then a decision gets made. The decision, in this case, was made on a Thursday morning. I was in my hospital room. I had been upgraded to a regular room by then, out of the ER, oxygen saturation stabilized, antibiotics running. I was eating actual hospital food and watching something stupid on my laptop and my phone buzzed. It was a Chase notification. The fraud investigation had resulted in a hold on the flagged transactions, pending reversal. Processing. I did the math. The Mariners Cove Resort charge had been flagged as part of the investigation. The resort's payment system would have attempted to process the balance, the remaining room charge that was due upon arrival, the nightly rate, the incidentals deposit, and it would have declined. Not insufficient funds. Flagged account, declined, in public, at check-in, at a beachfront resort in Destin, Florida, where my family was presumably standing at a reception desk in their vacation clothes with their luggage, probably already talking about which restaurant to try first. My mother's first voicemail came in at 11:47 a.m. I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is absolutely... And then her voice did something I had never heard it do in 26 years. It cracked, not with grief, with something that sounded almost like disbelief. The disbelief of someone who has never been stopped before and cannot process the sensation. The second voicemail came at 12:03 p.m. You are a selfish, ungrateful child, and I want you to know that what you've done to this family... She didn't finish the sentence. I don't know if she ran out of words or recording time. I sat in my hospital bed with the oxygen sensor on my finger, and I listened to both voicemails twice. Then I forwarded them to Naomi Park. She called me 20 minutes later. These are going to be useful, she said, which in attorney language means these are extraordinary. Detective Callahan called that afternoon to confirm the police report had been formally accepted and that the Financial Crimes Unit was proceeding with an investigation into the unauthorized use of a debit card, a misdemeanor theft charge at minimum, potentially a felony depending on the total amount and the establishment of intent. He was careful. He said proceeding with and depending on and at this stage. He wasn't promising anything, but he also said, your documentation is unusually thorough. That helps. I thought about the charged oxygen sensor clip on my finger. I thought about Patricia Morales, RN, putting her arms out in front of the elevator. I thought about Dr. Webb actually sitting down, to tell me I wasn't safe to leave. None of them knew each other. None of them had coordinated. They were just professionals doing their jobs. But the result of all of them simply doing their jobs was a paper trail that now stretched from a hospital elevator in Columbus, Ohio, to a declined payment at a resort check-in desk in the Florida Panhandle. My family's phones were ringing with numbers they didn't recognize, numbers I had helped dial. Tyler texted me that Thursday evening. The message was, you need to call this off. I didn't respond. My father sent a longer message, 3 paragraphs, very measured, the diplomat in full operation mode. He said that he understood I was upset, that the situation had been handled poorly on everyone's part, that there were better ways to work through this as a family, that he and my mother would of course reimburse the account charges as soon as they returned, that this was not the kind of thing that needed to involve outside parties. Outside parties. That's what he called Detective Callahan and Naomi Park and Camille Torres, MSW. I did not respond to that either. I saved the text, forwarded it to Naomi. She later told me it was, legally speaking, an acknowledgement that the charges existed and had not been authorized by me. In other words, he had, in trying to make the problem go away, confirmed the problem. The diplomat had finally said the wrong thing. I was discharged, actually discharged, with Dr. Webb's sign-off, oxygen stable, antibiotics complete, on a Saturday morning. Camille Torres came to say goodbye. She brought me a printed list of resources. A therapist at Ohio Health's outpatient behavioral health department named Dr. Sandra Reyes, who specialized in family trauma, a domestic violence and financial abuse hotline, contact information for the patient advocate in case I needed further documentation. She also gave me a hug. I'm not generally a hugger. I didn't let myself get emotional in the hospital. Too much to manage, too much to think about. But when Camille Torres put her arms around me, I felt something give way, just for a second. Not breaking, giving. The difference between a bone breaking and a knot finally loosening. You did this, she said quietly. Every piece of it. You. Mrs. Delaney picked me up. She drove a 2014 Honda CR-V, very clean, with a pine air freshener and a rosary hanging from the mirror. She didn't ask questions on the drive home. She just handed me a thermos of soup she'd made that morning, actual soup with actual vegetables, and said I was welcome to her guest room for as long as I needed while my apartment aired out and I got my strength back. I took her up on it for 4 days. My family came home from Florida on a Sunday. The resort had apparently accommodated them. Comped one night, worked something out. My mother has always been good at leveraging indignation resignation to get what she wants, but they'd had to call Tyler for cash, which he resented, and the whole trip had apparently been shadowed by the knowledge that something was happening at home that they couldn't control. They arrived at the Gahana house to find my key on the kitchen counter, and a letter. Not from me, from Naomi Park on Columbus Legal Aid letterhead, outlining the charges under investigation, the documentation on file, the potential civil and criminal liability, and a formal request that all contact with me be directed through her office going forward. My mother called me 7 times between 6 US and 8:30 that Sunday evening. I did not answer. My father texted, "This has gone too far." I forwarded it to Naomi. Tyler sent a voice memo, 47 seconds of him explaining, with increasing agitation, that I was burning the family down over something that was not that serious, and that I needed to think about what I actually want here. I listened to the whole thing, then I sent it to Naomi and asked if it was relevant. She said, "Keep everything." The resolution didn't come all at once. It rarely does. The criminal investigation proceeded slowly, as investigations do, and as of the time I'm writing this, the case is still technically open. Naomi expects a plea agreement or diversion program. Detective Callahan told me that first offense family financial crimes usually resolve that way. No dramatic courtroom scene, no handcuffs, just accountability, finally, and paperwork. The civil side moved faster. Naomi filed a formal demand for repayment of the $2,629 plus legal fees. It was sent to my parents' certified mail. My mother, who had called me a selfish, ungrateful child in a voicemail that now lived in an attorney's case file, responded through an attorney of her own, which told me, more than anything else, that she understood the situation she was in. The $2,629 was returned to my account in full, via wire transfer, on a Wednesday morning. No note, no apology, just the number, sitting there in my Chase account, like a held breath finally released. I stared at it for a while. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more specific than that. The feeling you get when something that has been wrong for a very long time is finally, minimally, correct. I started seeing Dr. Sandra Reyes, therapist, Ohio Health Behavioral Health, 6 weeks after discharge. She has a CPFT certification and 12 years of experience in complex family trauma, and she wears very calm colors and has a plant on her windowsill that she waters while she talks, which I initially found odd and now find deeply comforting. She asked me, in our 3rd session, what I thought had actually changed. I thought about the elevator, about Patricia Morales, arms out. I thought about Dr. Webb sitting down to talk to me, about Camille Torres pressing her hand against my shoulder in a strange house on a floor I'd slid to alone, about Mrs. Delaney and her thermos of soup. I learned, I said, that strangers did what my family wouldn't, and that maybe I'd been calling the wrong people family. Dr. Reyes made a note of that. I don't know exactly what she wrote, but she nodded like it was the right answer, or at least an honest one. It's been 8 months. My lungs are stable, doctor. OC adjusted my maintenance inhaler protocol, and I've had one minor flare that I managed outpatient, at home, without calling anyone except my pharmacy. Biscuit knocked my water glass off the nightstand 3 times last week, which is his way of saying he's thriving. My apartment on Calumet Street has a new deadbolt that I installed myself with a YouTube tutorial and a screwdriver, which took 45 minutes and felt disproportionately significant. I've spoken to my mother once since the hospital. She called in October. I picked up, I don't fully know why, and she said, "I hope you're satisfied." I thought about that for a second. "Yeah," I said, "actually." Then I hung up. She had spent 26 years teaching me that my needs were an inconvenience, my health was a performance, my voice was a disruption. She had walked me out of a hospital in a bracelet and hissed that I was embarrassing her. She had taken $2,629 from my account while I was on oxygen and spent it on a beachfront resort and a prepaid dinner reservation. She had made me feel, for most of my life, that I was too much. It turned out I wasn't enough of a problem. I was just getting started.